All right, hello. We are looking at the topic of leadership. This is the second lecture in that topic. Um, the second to last of the four management functions. We'll be looking at controlling next week. And we've talked about traits of leadership and aspects of leadership. Today, we're going to talk more specifically about work groups and teams. So we'll talk about different types of groups and teams, why people join them, what the stages are of group and team development. We will look at four essential characteristics, we're going to call them, of groups and teams. We're going to describe how conflict arises and when it's good, when it's bad, and how we can manage that. And we're going to discuss how organizations, how you can manage conflict to mitigate the impact of negative conflict and improve the possible benefits from positive conflict. What is a group? A group for our purposes is two or more people who interact, we're going to say regularly, to accomplish a common purpose or goal. If you have lunch with somebody one time, that's not for our purposes a group, but if it's a bowling club would be a group for our purposes. Within an organization, a functional group is a group created by the organization that tends to be longer term, so an unspecified time horizon related to an organizational purpose. Think about our discussion about structure. The marketing department would be a functional group. The accounting department is a functional group. They're grouped by function. But you also have informal groups within organizations. Maybe the company, I don't know, social committee or a softball club or just a bunch of people who meet up and play Dungeons and Dragons on a Friday night. That would be an informal or an interest group, not relevant really to the goals of the organization, but still meets our definition of a group. Unlike a functional group, a task group is created by the organization, which is like a functional group. However, it's more temporary and has the range of purposes tend to be related to a specific time horizon or maybe a specific project. This can have maybe be team projects, building projects, whatever, something that is has a limited specific time horizon. A team, for our conversation today, is a group of workers that functions as a unit and often with little or no supervision. Many of you may end up working on teams. I worked on what's called a deal team when I was in banking, where we had someone who looked after cash management services. I looked after lending. There was someone else who was an analyst who would write up the financial details related to the client and the proposed deal. And I wasn't in charge of them. We all reported to someone else who wasn't in the group. But unless we needed to escalate something for whatever reason, a policy escalation, we just functioned autonomously as a group. There was nobody, we had very little supervision. Here's an example of the different types of groups you can get within an organization. Here is our functional group or department, as we've talked about it when talking about structure. Here is our project team or task group rather, sorry, or a cross-functional team. All the same thing. If you remember from our matrix management discussion, right, you have a matrix because you have a project team that goes across functions, which is why we call it a matrix. It creates this matrix. And then, in addition, in this graph, we have this informal team. We don't know what these guys do, but let's say they're, I don't know, these are the guys who meet and play Dungeons and Dragons one Friday a month. And there's somebody from legal, there's a vice president, there's some project manager, there's a couple line staff, whatever, or the softball team, fantasy football league, whatever you like. Types of teams and their purpose. You can have teams that are devoted to problem solving. This is the most common one you'd get in an organization. These would be sort of closer to the operational side of things, knowledge workers who solve a specific problem, maybe some engineers who are tackling a production issue, or a marketing team that's launching a new campaign. A management team tends to be cross-functional and maybe working to solve a higher order project or program, and might coordinate lower level problem solving teams. Then you have this thing called a work team. This is the kind of team I was talking about where it's a team that is largely autonomous. Most of their work is unsupervised and just does the daily work of the organization, but works in these teams. Virtual team becoming increasingly common. Just this has to do more with geography and the structure of meeting, a team that is geographically dispersed, and so their meetings would all be generally via telecommunication rather than meeting in person very much. This obviously, this type of team expanded a lot during COVID and is also very common for companies that maybe are highly specialized. So just by the virtue of how specialized the team members are, they're dispersed globally and it is just convenient to meet virtually, especially with the advent of improved video conferencing. Something a bit more less common these days is the quality circle. This tended to be related to manufacturing, a group that would meet and maybe review how the quality of factory output and talk about ways to improve it and review maybe achievement of goals related to quality. Why do people join groups? What is the motivation? Well, you can have, this tends to be more for informal groups. You can have interpersonal attraction, although it's not just informal groups. Oftentimes you'll hear after an interview process, the interview committee might talk about the chemistry and the fit. They're talking about interpersonal attraction, similar attitudes, common interests, shared experience, etc. Groups might form around activities. You join a baseball team. Maybe there's group attraction, maybe there's not, but you're all there to partake in that activity. Chess, baseball, video games, whatever. Or it might be goal related. You're all there to raise money for a specific cancer charity or some kind of political lobbying. That's related to the goal. So you might also, might be related to need satisfaction, perhaps joining a singles group or some kind of emotional support, maybe a church, or instrumental benefits. This is a form of need satisfaction, I guess, more tangible. Maybe you join a professional networking group where, or a chamber of commerce where you're going there with some objective in mind. You're trying to get something out of it that is maybe related to a specific vocational goal that you have. Something like Rotary Club. Those used to be very popular avenues for professional networking. When groups form, there are some proposed stages of group development. This is sort of a well-known timeline of group development, and the 4 stages are forming, storming, norming, and performing, if that isn't a mouthful. What's involved at each stage? In the forming stage, this is where you're getting to know each other, maybe doing some ice-breaking activities. It's first day as a team, trying to figure out who the other members of the group are. Storming, this is sort of the honeymoon phase is over, if you like. And now you might have some conflict arise, some competition. It talks about defensiveness, arguing, but also creative conflict as well. So here's maybe you might get negative conflict as well as this more creative conflict, brainstorming, division of labor. This is really where everyone's trying to find their place. And the group is starting to get down to business, if you like, but having some friction that needs to be addressed. Norming, now you're starting to figure things out. As the name implies, we'll talk about norms, but you're establishing those norms or ground rules as a group. Things are becoming hopefully more friendly and there's trust being developed, right? You're confiding in one another and meaningful progress is being made towards group goals. And then in the final stage, performing, now hopefully you're sort of firing on all cylinders. The group's able to work through conflict and has a track record of doing so. Members feel committed to the team and labor and tasks. There's an established way of breaking up the work and making sure the job gets done, and which is why it's called performing. Goals are actually being met, targets are being met. Different role structures in a team. And these aren't mutually exclusive, but there's the task specialist role, which may be related to your area of expertise. Maybe you're in a group at university and you're the person who knows accounting and someone else knows marketing. That would be your task specialist role. But there's also social emotional roles. Maybe you are the person who organizes activities, or you're the person that people confide in. This social emotional role can perhaps be more informal or formal. If your job is to be a counselor at a workplace, or an occupational therapist, that might be a specific formal social emotional role. Or it might just be you happen to be the person that everyone goes to with their problems. That would be less formal, but a social emotional role. Role structures, how do these arise? Well, the idea here is that they go through a four-step process, or what's called four episodes, where the role expectations are formed and then sent. So the role expectations are formed at some place within the group. That role is then sent to the person who is intended to fill that role. This is where it crosses what you might say the group individual boundary. Here's the group, here's the individual, group, individual. The individual receives that sent role and perceives it and then enacts it. And of course, at each of these stages, there is a potential loss or distortion of information, kind of like playing telephone. By the time you get from the expectation to what's actually enacted, these things might be quite different. And of course, that's because at each step, what is sent to the potential role holder may be different than what's expected just because of communication. The way that the role holder perceives what's been sent is informed by their own biases and understanding. And then the way they enact it is also even different from, it's kind of like those memes, what my friends think I do, what I think I do, what I actually do. That's sort of what's going on here. Even a difference between what you think you do and what you actually do is the difference between a perceived role and an enacted role. Problems that can arise are of a few types. You can have role ambiguity when the role that's sent is unclear, and so the individual isn't clear on the expectations. That can create a diversion between the sent role and the perceived role. You can have role conflict when the messages are clear, but perhaps they conflict. So you are told that the example given here is finish by Friday, but no overtime. Well, only one of those is possible. Or there can be role overload, where just either essentially the expectations exceed the individual's capabilities. And that might be an issue with fit, perhaps, which we'll look at in a second here. Doesn't necessarily mean that it might just be too much for anyone. The individual might be competent and it's just too much. The expectations are too high, or the expectations might be reasonable, but the individual isn't up to it. Another thing to look at here that we mentioned before in our stages is norms. When we're talking about norming, it means we're establishing the norms or group norms. What are behavioral norms? They're the boundaries between acceptable and unacceptable behavior in the group. An example here might surround punctuality. Is it expected that meetings start on time and information will not be repeated? Or is it more flexible? Is it the sort of meeting where everybody knows you can show up? It doesn't really start until 5 minutes after the stated time. You've probably experienced both of these. Might not even be stated specifically, but that culture is established also often by a group leader. Some issues with norms, when it can be problematic if you try to generalize the norms of your group to other groups. You may have experienced this. What is normal for your peer group or your a work group that you're used to may not translate to your next work group or your next peer group, for better or worse. Expectations may be higher, lower, just different ways of approaching meeting structure, whatever. And even the application of norms may vary within a team. Somebody gets away with being late all the time, but other people can't get away with it for whatever reason. Somebody gets away with poor performance, whereas other members aren't able to. Norm variation can often lead to problems within a group. It can create resentment if people feel that they're being held to a stricter norm than someone else. What causes norm conformity, or why do people conform to the norms of a group? There could be pressure from the group. Maybe they can apply sanctions, formal or informal. Maybe if you don't dress, your standard of attire doesn't conform to your office environment. People might make comments about, oh, you're wearing sneakers today, huh? Or, oh, interesting choice of shirt. Right? Or to more specific pressure to conform, where somebody just explicitly calls you out and says that you don't look, this isn't acceptable attire. Uh, individual, yeah, apparently an ambiguous stimulus. If people are unsure of expectations, they may be more likely to conform. Maybe you've experienced this where when you're newer to a group and you're not sure about the norms, you try harder to figure out what those norms are and conform to the group. Individual traits, for example, some people just are more conscientious and just want to conform. Others are more resistant to conformity. There's pros and cons to each of those. It's theoretically more intelligent people are less susceptible to pressure to conform, so they are more like, doesn't mean they don't conform, but they're more likely to make that decision internally rather than taking it as a given and accepting pressure to conform. Or there could be situational factors. If there's more unanimity, they may be more likely to conform. If the group size is larger, they maybe feel they can be more anonymous and get away with less conformity than if it's a smaller group. Who knows? But those are external situational reasons for norm conformity. In terms of getting individuals or different types of conformity, sometimes you'll get individuals who just straightforwardly and proactively adopt the norms of the group in a conscientious way. Other times you might get individuals who try to see what they can get away with, if you like, obey the spirit of the norms while retaining their own individuality. Maybe you have to wear a uniform or a certain standard of dress, but you wear crazy socks, and that's the way you retain your individuality while still obeying the spirit of the norms. Socialization is an important aspect of disseminating norms to a group. Oftentimes organizations will have formalized socialization processes like a mentorship, where someone who is a senior colleague but not a direct supervisor, you spend time with them, they help you, you can ask them questions without having to worry about it getting back to your boss. What are the expectations about meetings? What are the expectations? Can I get away with not wearing a tie? That's a way to speed up the process of adapting to group norms. Cohesiveness is another aspect of group behavior, and really we're going to talk about these two things, the norms of the group and the cohesiveness of the group. The norms of the group can be good or bad. The norms of the group might, if you think about peer pressure, are the norms of the group destructive? Are they toxic? You hear about toxic workplace. That might be a workplace that has negative norms, but also is it cohesive? How cohesive is the group? Is there a cohesive group dynamic, or is it more of an individual workplace? There's not a lot of contact. People aren't really on the same page. And those vary independently, as we'll talk about. Cohesiveness means, for our purposes, loyalty of members to the group, and even the mutual attractiveness of the group. Is there chemistry, for lack of a better term, and for better or worse? Here's what I mean by for better or worse. So, in a work context or an organizational context, the norms regarding performance in the group might be high or low. Maybe it's a group that really strives to have good performance and achieve and be high achieving. Think about maybe a group of friends in high school that are all on the honor roll, play on the sports teams, and really spur each other on, versus a group that maybe is doing things they shouldn't be. And really, even if someone tries to, within the group, tries to perform well, they get called a nerd or teacher's pet, and the group norms is to bring performance down, right? That's what's happening on this dimension. Does the group norms favor high performance or low performance? And the other dimension here is the cohesiveness. Are the group members loyal to the group and committed to these norms? And you end up with some interesting results here based on the combination of these two dimensions. Obviously, the best is this one here, where the group is cohesive. You got sort of a loyal team. Everybody's on the same page, and they're working towards a high level of performance. Here you have the second best option. The norms are towards high performance, but the group dynamic is a bit less cohesive. But we're still working towards a positive goal. Things get interesting below here. Now we have a negative, the norms are negative, but the cohesiveness is low. So this is low performance. But funnily enough, worse than this is actually when there's a low norm of performance, but high cohesiveness. You might think of a gang for this one. That might be the best example I can think of. This is just you live in a rough neighborhood, but you're still able, nobody's forcing you, or you're not part of a gang. Here, now it's a gang, it's organized crime. The group is efficiently pursuing low performance, whatever that looks like. So interestingly, from an organizational perspective, if the performance norms are low, it's better that group cohesiveness is low than high, because if it's high and the norms are low, the group is going to be better able to enforce those norms of low performance. Within this idea of leadership, we have formal and informal leadership. An informal leader is someone, it says here, who engages in leadership activities, but they haven't been given an official status as a leader. They aren't formally recognized by the organization as a leader. And it says they draw on referent power. So they might be charismatic, or they might just be that person who's been there a while, knows how to get things done that you're always going to, and they just become a leader because of the respect people have for them, either for a personality reason or a technical reason, or both. A formal leader has been given a leadership position by the group members. Think of an elected official, think of someone who's appointed as the team captain for the softball team, whatever the reason is, that person is officially a leader. But oftentimes we just say someone's a leader in the group, and they have no formal standing as such, but the evidence is there that they are a leader. Turning to the subject of conflict now, we define it as disagreement among two or more individuals, groups, or organizations. So these two are within the organization. Here, it's two individuals within a group. Here, it's disagreement between two groups within an organization. And here, it's between two separate organizations, or an organization and an external entity. While often viewed as a bad thing, right? We hear people talk about avoiding conflict. Sometimes conflict is beneficial and even necessary. If you're married or have family, you know that sometimes you just need to get the conflict out in order to continue to have a relationship, right? The alternative is just to be resigned about a relationship and abandon a relationship, and that's the same in groups. So beneficial types of conflict or beneficial results can be the promotion of research, maybe some healthy competition, or testing each other's ideas. I contribute to peer-reviewed journals where the reviewers are expected to push back on my ideas, and we kind of argue it out so that the best idea wins the contest. But for that to be possible, the structure needs to be cordial and constructive. A peer-reviewed system is not going to work if I have to worry about someone being violent or nasty to me, and that's considered very not non-conducive to good performance to behave badly when engaging in what's supposed to be positive conflict. It's actually been shown and theorized that there's an optimal level of conflict. No conflict tends to lead to low performance. Probably because people aren't being called to account and ideas aren't being shared or tried and tested. But at the same time, too much conflict can also lead to low performance. You're not getting any work done. You're always debating ideas. Maybe you've worked somewhere like this, or you're always just fighting, so nothing gets done. So there is, it's there isn't any prescriptions for what that optimal level looks like, but it's not zero and it's not all the time. Causes of conflict are many and varied. It can be personality related, right? A class of personalities. It can be values related or beliefs related. I think this is the best way to do something. You think this is the best way to do something. I think this is unethical, whereas you don't have a problem with it. There could be competition where you get two personalities that are both type A personalities, and they resent the competition of the other. You can have intergroup conflict between different groups. That might be competition for scarce resources. I'm in a marketing group, you're in an engineering group. We both want an increase to our budget, but there's only so much money to go around. Or there can be conflict between the organization and the environment. Conflict with our competitors is probably the most common and expected, indeed assumed. Maybe some consumer groups are boycotting our organization for whatever reason, or maybe there's a big public sector strike and you're a university and your workers are going on strike. Some ways to promote positive conflict can be to have, if you can increase competition within reason can be good if it's structured correctly. Ways you can do this, you can grant rewards. Generally speaking, those rewards need to be fairly distributed. There needs to be clear rules of the game that everybody's perceived to have an equal chance to win those rewards. If there's favoritism, that won't create positive competition. Sometimes you might need to hire someone from outside if there's a group that maybe has adopted a low performance norm. Maybe you need to bring some people in who have high performance norms to pick things up, right? We all need to pick up our game now that Bill's here because he's making us look bad, which may be good, but can also lead to resentment depending on the mindset of that group. Or you can change established procedures. Maybe we just need to change the way that we're doing things. People are getting too comfortable, but that can also create resentment and people might leave, right? This isn't the job I signed up for. I don't like the restructuring of my role, etc. But it can be a way to create, these are all ways to potentially improve positive conflict or the positive consequences of conflict. How do we manage negative conflict? A few strategies. First of all, if we are stimulating conflict, it should be for constructive ends. We shouldn't try to stir up negative conflict, obviously. If negative conflict does start to threaten, well, we need to nip it in the bud as quickly as possible. Usually this is before big factions formed. Oftentimes, what starts off as a small conflict, the conflicting parties start gossiping, forming factions or coalitions, and then it turns into half the group versus the other half of the group. If it does get out of hand, then you have to really get into some conflict resolution. Maybe you even have to call the whole group together and let both parties speak their mind and resolve it that way, if possible. Some other easy wins, if you can expand the resource base, right? I want $100,000 and Bill's department wants $100,000, but there's only 90,000. Well, maybe you can find $10,000 somewhere else and everybody gets what they want, right? Maybe you can just get rid of any friction that is causing conflict. Related to procedures. Maybe there's something that can be fixed in a procedure. Maybe you can create a liaison role between two competing groups. Maybe you can create a task force to address an issue that draws on the groups that are in conflict and maybe reduce the conflict because now you're working together for a common goal, which leads us to our next strategy here. If you're able to somehow realign the focus. Don't just think about your department. If you can get these groups or individuals to think about higher level objectives, as opposed to lower level conflicts. Think about sports teams, right? I never get to be the pitcher or um, whatever. I want to play always in a certain position, and the coach says, "Well, this is a team. Let's get you to not just focus on your own enjoyment, but the goals of the team, the higher level goal." Or sometimes you just need to match the personalities and work habits better. You have maybe this analyst works better with this banker's sort of style of writing deals. I know when I worked in banking, I had some analysts that we worked in a similar way that really complemented each other. Other times, it wasn't, and it was just a personality. It wasn't the best fit. New analyst, new banker. All of a sudden, now we work together really well. It was just a case of needing to move some parts around to figure the puzzle out, if you like. Um, if the conflict has broken out now, you can't avoid it, or you haven't been able to fix it using the methods we just discussed. Well, now we can think about perhaps, is there a compromise solution? Compromise solutions can be okay, but sometimes everybody loses to some extent with a compromise. Maybe we need to exercise some interpersonal problem-solving techniques and get each party to sit down at the table and try and see each other's point of view. This requires a level of emotional maturity that may or may not be there, however. Or maybe we need to actually get someone to arbitrate the conflict, either a team member, a senior manager, a neutral third party, something like that. That can be another way to resolve conflict. This moves us on to this idea of negotiation. Perhaps the conflict is over resources. If that's the case, or over a decision, there's a whole literature on negotiation and a few literatures actually on how two parties, the whole point of negotiation is to reach agreement on an issue, even though you have conflicting preferences or conflicting objectives even. At its most basic level, if I'm buying a television, I have some conflicting objectives and some aligned objectives. The seller wants to sell a television. I want to buy one, so those are aligned. But the seller wants me to pay a lot, and I want to pay as little as possible. So in that sense, we have conflicting preferences. So some approaches include the psychological approach. This is the sort of the art of the deal approach. What's the psychology of negotiating that will lead to the best outcome for me? How can I carry myself? What can I be wearing? What colors should I wear to project power, usually to do with projecting power or manipulating. Situational, how can I set up? This is an interesting one. Is there anything we can do to, in how we structure a negotiation to achieve a better outcome? There's mathematical models. If you've seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, that's about John Nash and bargaining theory, or the application of game theory to negotiations, and how we can predict the outcome, not necessarily to give us strategies, but really how can we achieve optimal outcomes, and how can we predict the outcomes of negotiations based on their structure. And then the cognitive approach. What behaviors can we predict the outcome of negotiations based on the knowledge of the existence of certain behavioral biases. So as with other areas we've looked at, the classic approach versus the behavioral approach to management, the mathematical approach or game theory says people behave rationally and try to maximize their utility based on rational decision making. The cognitive approach says actually people don't always behave rationally. They have certain biases, but those biases have a predictability to them that we can, if we know about, we can account for, maybe even manage, or if nothing else, at least allow us to better predict the outcome of negotiations based on certain predictable biases that human beings are known to have. So here's a summary of what we've discussed. I won't go through this in great detail here, but you know where to find me. This all was interesting and something to take away for your own future leadership or current leadership as managers. And looking forward to seeing what people post in the pack back for this week. Talk to you in the next lecture.